Marc Lamont Hill, you had COVID, and I want to turn to the issue of health care and the pandemic. On Tuesday night, Joe Biden rejected accusations that he supported Medicare for all and acknowledged many people would not even be covered under his plan to create a government-sponsored public option. But as he tried to explain his plan, the debate descended into chaos.
The vast majority of the American people would still not be in that option, number one.
Joe, you agreed with Bernie Sanders, who's far left, on the manifesto, we call it, and that gives you socialized medicine.
Look, hey,
Are you saying
I'm not going to listen to him. The fact of the matter is, I beat Bernie Sanders.
Not by much.
I beat him a whole hell of a lot. I'm here standing facing you, old buddy.
Pocahontas would have left 2 days early. You would have lost every primary.
All he knows how to do is
Super Tuesday. You got very lucky.
Here's the deal. I got very lucky. I'm going to get very lucky tonight as well. And tonight I'm going to make sure, because here's the deal. Here's the deal. The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
But you
I just want to make sure.
Joe, you're the liar.
I want to make sure.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
I want to make sure.
Mr. President, can you let him finish, sir?
No, he doesn't know how to do that. He has,
You'd be surprised.
You pick
You'd be surprised.
the wrong guy, the wrong night at the wrong time.
Listen, you agreed with Bernie Sanders to the manifesto.
The whole idea.
Let him disavowing.
There is no manifesto, number one.
Please let him speak, Mr.
Number
President.
two.
You just lost the left.
Number two.
You just lost the left. You agreed with Bernie Sanders on a plan
folks,
absolutely agreed
folks, do you have any idea what this clown's doing?
They call it
Mr.
Do you have any idea?
socialized medicine.
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, he is not for any help for people needing health care because he, in fact, already has cost 10 million people their health care that they had from their employers because of his recession. Number one. Number two, there are 20 million people getting health care through Obamacare now that he wants to take it away. He won't ever look you in the eye and say that's what he wants to do.
During the debate, Joe Biden repeatedly criticized President Trump over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic that's killed over 205,000 people in the United States, by far the highest death toll in the world.
Look, you folks at home, how many of you got up this morning and had an empty chair at the kitchen table because someone died of COVID? How many of you were in a situation where you lost your mom or dad and you couldn't even speak to them? You had a nurse holding a phone up so you could, in fact, say goodbye.
You would have lost far more people. Far more people.
And
you would have been.
And by the way, his own CDC director says we could lose as many as another 200,000 people between now and the end of the year. And he held up. He said, if we just wear a mask, we can save half those numbers. Just a mask.
President Trump, you have begun to increasingly question the effectiveness of masks as a disease preventer. And in fact, recently you have cited the issue of waiters touching their masks and touching plates. Are you questioning
the efficacy of masks? You have to understand, if you look, I mean, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test, and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to. But I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
President Trump mocking Joe Biden for wearing a mask. Still with us, Temple University professor Marc Lamont Hill, author of the forthcoming book, We Still Here: Pandemic, Policing, Protest, and Possibility. Mark, you had COVID. Respond to this discussion and what we've seen President Trump's record, if you can talk about that, and what Joe Biden is recommending.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to watch the president of the United States mocking someone for wearing a mask too much. It was almost like a high school bully. It was very bizarre. The idea of publicly representing the importance of the mask, to me, is a good idea, even if one were to overuse it, if that's even possible. To me, I'd rather err on the side of caution than not. But the idea of not erring on the side of caution is representative of the entire Trump administration's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Trump didn't really defend himself against the fact that 200,000 people have died. Instead, he simply argued that more would have died under Joe Biden. He didn't address the fact that this was entirely preventable. He pats himself on the back for saying that he was able to stop people coming in from China, largely playing on xenophobia, but ignores the fact that he didn't block any sort of travel from Europe. And when we look at a place like New York City, the bulk of the people who had COVID right here, where I am right now, the strains that they found were from Europe and other parts of North America. So again, he smuggles in his racism and his xenophobia into his handling of a public health crisis. The issue around masks isn't just about Trump's wearing of the mask. It's about the level of direction that came out of the White House regarding what we should do in a public health crisis. He lies on Fauci essentially by suggesting that Fauci was saying that we shouldn't wear masks when in fact Fauci was speaking to the scarcity of the mask. But the scarcity of the masks emerges because Donald Trump didn't follow the pandemic playbook that Obama left, which suggested that we need tens of millions of masks not in storage, but in reserve. And yet Trump ignored that along with every other dimension of this. Trump could have aggressively stopped this. But again, once we found out that vulnerable people, economically vulnerable people, poor people, and the elderly were the most vulnerable and the largest demographic of people dying from COVID-19, suddenly they were rendered disposable, and the Trump administration did very little. And as far as the public health part, or rather the healthcare part of this is an interesting moment. Trump spends the entire debate painting Joe Biden, a neoliberal, as a radical socialist. And there are, at the same debate where Biden is defending police and saying he doesn't want to defund police and doesn't support the Green New Deal and doesn't support Medicare for all, he's still being painted as a socialist. Now, he's a much better alternative to Trump, and I'm certainly going to vote for him for that reason. But it's fascinating to watch Trump use this language. The truth here is that Trump has not engaged in any kind of plan or practice that will allow more Americans to be covered, that will allow more Americans to be safe. Yes, he signed an executive order to get us cheaper insulin, but that addresses 2% of the population of people who need insulin. So no, it's not coming into America like water. His attempts to address pre-existing conditions through an executive order do nothing to address what the ACA did. He has essentially undermined any chance at universal health care, any chance at protecting the American public, but especially the most vulnerable. Biden's plan isn't great. It's not perfect, but it's considerably better than Trump's. And that's what we have to deal with right now at this moment, is the reality that Trump has consigned us to death if we continue to follow his plan.
And of course, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, goes before the Supreme Court on November 10th. Remains to be seen whether there will be a ninth justice, Amy Coney Barrett, who has criticized the Affordable Care Act. I want to turn, though, to President Trump and Joe Biden also sparring over mail-in voting during last night's debate.
The fact is that there are going to be millions of people because of COVID that are going to be voting by mail-in ballots, like he does, by the way. He sits behind the Resolute desk and sends his ballot to Florida, number one. Number two, we're going to make sure that those people who want to vote in person are able to vote because enough poll watchers are there to make sure they can socially distance. The polls are open on time, and the polls stay open until the votes are counted. And this is all about trying to dissuade people from voting because he's trying to scare people into thinking that it's not going to be legitimate. Show up and vote. You will determine the outcome of this election. Vote, vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you from being able to determine the outcome of this election. And in terms of whether or not when the votes are counted, and they're all counted, that will be accepted. If I win, that will be accepted. If I lose, that'll be accepted. But by the way, if in fact he says he's not sure what he's going to accept, well, let me tell you something. It doesn't matter, because if we get the votes, it's going to be all over. He's going to go. He can't stay in power. It won't happen. It won't happen. So vote. Just make sure you understand you have it in your control to determine what this country is going to look like the next 4 years. Is it going to change, or are you going to get 4 more years of these lies?
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. The other thing, it's nice on November 3rd, you're watching and you see who won the election. And I think we're going to do well because people are really happy with the job we've done. But you know what? We won't know. We might not know for months because these ballots are going to be all over. Take a look at what happened in Manhattan. Take a look at what happened in New Jersey. Take a look at what happened in Virginia and other places. They're not losing 2%, 1%, which, by the way, is too much. An election could be won or lost with that. They're losing 30 and 40%. It's a fraud, and it's a shame. And can you imagine where they say you have to have your ballot in by November 10th? November 10th. That means that's 7 days after the election, in theory, should have been announced.
Okay.
We have major states with that,
sir,
all run by Democrats.
2 minutes is 2 minutes.
All run by Democrats. It's
President Trump,
it's a rigged election.
You're going to be able to continue. You have been charging for months that mail-in balloting is going to be a disaster. You say it's rigged, that it's going to lead to fraud. But in 2018, in the last midterm election, 31 million people voted mail-in voting. That was a quarter, more than a quarter of all the voters that year cast their ballots by mail. Now that millions of mail-in ballots have gone out, what are you going to do about it? And are you counting on the Supreme Court, including a Justice Barrett, to settle any dispute?
Yeah, I think I'm counting on them to look at the ballots, definitely. I hope we don't need them in terms of the election itself. But for the ballots, I think so.
Kristen Clark, this whole issue of the mail-in ballots and also of the president's calling on his supporters to watch the polls. You tweeted this was an attempt to promote intimidation and voter suppression that is also unlawful. And you said we will go to court to block any attempt to deny, discourage, or deter people from freely casting their ballots. Talk about your sense of the president's attempt to intimidate voters.
Well, this is an old and familiar tactic. We saw the same thing from the president in 2018 when he tweeted ominously the night before the election that there will be people out watching and they're ready to prosecute. And, they're thinly veiled efforts to intimidate voters, and it's all about intimidating Black and brown voters in particular. There's no mistake as to why he referred to Philadelphia in particular last night. And there are a few things. One, these repeated claims that mail voting is fraudulent are baseless and unsubstantiated, and that's backed even by his own FBI director, who said there is no evidence of any vote-by-mail fraud scheme in our country. Number two, we've got challenges with the U.S. Postal Service, a new postmaster general installed on his watch that has worked tooth and nail to slow down mail delivery, and we are in court battling Louis DeJoy right now to restore the status quo. Number three, there is a raging pandemic. There are some people who have no option. They cannot compromise their health or their safety to go out and vote in person this season, and so vote by mail is all that they can do. And number four, vote by mail is not new. There are 5 states in bipartisan fashion that have almost exclusively all vote by mail systems that have been in place for years. There are over 12.5 states where more than 50% of voters voted by mail in the last presidential election. And there is support for vote by mail from both Republicans and Democrats. My organization, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, is working tooth and nail to make sure that every eligible American can exercise their voice in our democracy. And we will not allow our efforts to be derailed by false claims of fraudulent voting or intimidation tactics that are aimed at the most vulnerable voters in our country.
Kristen Clark,
Kristen, I wanted to ask you, though, there is a danger, isn't there, of not so much in terms of voter fraud, but in ballots being a higher percentage of ballots cast being rejected because of technical issues and how the voter filled out the mail-in ballot. How are you going to deal with this situation, which really requires people to be enough poll watchers from both parties to be at every place where mail-in ballots are being counted after the election, doesn't it?
And there's work happening before the election as well. Right now, we are suing states that are using signature matching verification rules, for example, as a pretext to reject ballots cast by eligible voters. We're mobilizing an army of over 20,000 lawyers in anticipation of some of the fight that may lie on the other side of November 3rd. And no doubt there are well-funded groups that are all about suppressing the vote, that are bent on finding ways to disqualify mail-in ballots. But we are working hard to empower voters to make sure that they follow the steps necessary to cast a successful ballot. And we'll do everything that we can to beat back those who want to disenfranchise and silence voters who literally have no option in the middle of a pandemic but to vote by mail.
We're going to end with a clip from the debate. Joe Biden criticizing Trump for nominating Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court at a time when early voting has already begun in the presidential election. The moderator, Fox Chris Wallace, asked Biden what action he would take if elected.
So my question to you is, you have refused in the past to talk about it. Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take on that, that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak. You should go out and vote. You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you going to pack the court?
Make sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator. I'm not going to answer the question.
Why wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question is, the question is,
Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
Right. Gentlemen, I think
this is so
He's
unprecedented.
going to pack the court. Not going to give a list.
We have ended this segment. We're going to move on to the second segment.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? Keep yapping, man.
The people understand, Joe.
They sure
47 years you've done nothing. They understand.
All right.
Shut up, man. T-shirts are already being printed. I want to thank Kristen Clark, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and Marc Lamont Hill of Temple University, forthcoming book, We Still Here, Pandemic, Policing, Protest, and Possibility.